Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's watching. I'm Marc Spiegler, Global Director of Art Basel. Thank you for joining us. Before I introduce each of today's panelists, we'll start with some housekeeping. As always, we'll be taking questions from the audience toward the end of the talk. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to put those questions in. If you have comments, it would be great if you could save them towards the end because we get so many questions that it's hard enough to wade through them. But obviously, we're delighted to hear what you have to say. We're delighted to also, again, to have simultaneous translation into Mandarin. Again, there's a button at the bottom of your screen where you can choose whether to get the straight feed or the Mandarin translation. This week, we'll be discussing how the COVID-19 crisis has changed the art world in terms of its digital aspect, the ways, all the initiatives that have started as a result of people sheltering at home, of the fact that we can't travel to art fairs, to biennials, to museums, and what this means for the future. I'm very happy to have a wide range of panelists today. We have the art advisor, Ashley Carr, the collector, Arif Suherman, and the gallerist, Kamel Mennour. I mean, just the fact that today we're doing this on Zoom is illustrative of what's going on right now. I think many of us had never used Zoom and certainly never used Zoom so much until a few months ago. I mean, from a personal point of view, obviously, we had to accelerate Art Basel's digital initiatives when we canceled the Art Basel Hong Kong Fair that was supposed to take place in March. We brought forward the online viewing rooms, and we're going to be doing our second version of those next week. Elsewhere, of course, across the industry, we've seen myriad other things happening: virtual readings, studio visits, digital-only exhibitions. I mean, if you think about it, a few months ago, this industry was primarily working via PDFs, and now there's been this incredible digital renaissance. And I think the big question is, how does this shift the dynamics between galleries and collectors? And also, once the lockdown ends, what does it mean for the future of the art world online? So I'm going to start with Kamel Mennour. Kamel Mennour, wonderful gallerist from Paris. You started your gallery in 1999. You added a fourth space 4 years ago in London. Your artists have been present in all the great museums of the world, the Tate Modern, the Pompidou, as well as very specifically French places like Versailles. So my question to you is, prior to the crisis, your gallery was very active in its own spaces, in supporting its artists with museums and biennials, at art fairs. How did your approach change when you suddenly had to go digital?
Hello. Hello, Mark. Hello, Ashley. Hello, Arif. It was so brutal, so sudden, this event, which was global and was so incredible. I had to admit I stayed home for 3 weeks, eating a lot of chocolates and getting very close to my fridge and my phone. And I was really trying to understand what was the situation. So I was calling the artists every day, all the museum, which was either postponed or cancelled. I was thinking and working extremely fast for the online fairs of Hong Kong and trying to bring to the audience some of the images we had to present there. So it was so sudden, so brutal. I had to extremely quickly understand and adapt. The human nature has this chance to find an adaptation, different situation, and we had to accelerate to get linked to the community and to try to bring to the audience some of to feed the people and also to feed ourselves. So I would say the window was the artists. They were extremely with inspiration and bringing the ideas, and we were always connected to them. And most of them, they were extremely reactive to that situation. So I wrote pages, white pages to bring ideas. We had some Zoom. It was my first time. I even didn't know Zoom. So, getting to Zoom, I'm from the old school, and my kids helped me because I was working for the arts market, but also with Zoom for my school. I have 5 kids. So it was extremely intense, and we had to invent ourselves. So instead of getting a production for museum, for art, for our artists, I was trying to push and to accelerate the digital proposal to the audience. And it brought me to the level that I could reinvent myself. I saw that I was an old guy, and I felt extremely young with that situation.
Yeah. Kamel, I remember when we talked about this last week, you were saying that one of the specific ideas you wanted was that your gallery still felt Parisian, even though it was online. So how did you approach that?
One of the shows that I was thinking of the idea of local and of course of incarnation. The idea was to really submit to the audience that we needed to present some of the DNA that we were. I'm a very extremely French guy. I was reading a lot of books of old art dealers. And I was thinking on some of the concept of what was supposed to offer to the audience Paris. And I was reading a lot of books. And one of the books was Marcel Proust. And reading Marcel Proust, I was thinking of flying back to the 19th century and thinking what was modernity at that time. And Marcel Proust was an incredible writer and also an art critic, and was thinking that getting to the avant-garde at his time, he created this beautiful Anglicism, which was modern style. And what was the modern style in the beginning of the 19th century? It was a time in which there was a failure, and he wanted to suggest to the bourgeoisie that they should forget the 18th century and bring the avant-garde at that time. Picasso, Matisse, Braque, all those guys, and his audience was Jean Doucet, was Gertrude Stein. So it was very interesting for myself to imagine what should I do, and I brought back this concept, modern style, to where I am from. I'm from Paris, so we create a vectorization of a French apartment, an Haussmannien apartment, and we brought what was for me a proposal for the digital audience to see what could be the avant-garde when you are a Paris-based art gallery.
Great. Thank you, Kamel. That was a beautifully complex answer to my simple question. Arif, you're based in Jakarta, although at the moment you're in Singapore. You've been collecting for over 10 years. And I think as a result of the fact that the art world is not primarily in Jakarta or in Singapore, you've collected digitally, for a long time. You've bought works sight unseen for a long time. The collection that you've built is focused on a lot of women artists across many generations, artists such as Alice Neal, Lynette Yudamboke, Cecily Brown. You're on the Asia Pacific Acquisitions Committee of the Tate. Given that you've always bought art, a lot of art digitally, you've been exposed to sort of what galleries were doing up until about 3 months ago, and you can sort of give us a sense for how much it's changed. So sitting where you're sitting, how would you compare the experience of collecting virtually now to what it was like before COVID-19?
Thank you, Mark, for the kind invitation to the talk. Hello, everyone. As you mentioned, I've been collecting art for a little more than 10 years now. I've been seeing all the digital transformation already happening in the art world. I think what happened during this pandemic is that it forced everyone to speed up the process. So I think what we're seeing these past 3 months is something evolutionary. Not being able to do shows or art fairs, I think everyone just had no choice but to evolve right away and to utilize all the technology that's available to continue doing business. I personally love collecting art so much. I've always enjoyed going to art fairs. I've been going to the Hong Kong Fair for the past 10 years. So, not being able to go to fairs, not being able to see shows, not being able to see my good friends that I usually catch up with over dinner during fairs is actually pretty difficult for me. Yeah, I really don't think you can replace the experience of an actual art fair and seeing works in person. The excitement of the first day of the opening of the VIP preview, I still get the same adrenaline rush, even after 10 years. I don't think it just gets old. I think we all know that collecting art is about building relationships. There's just no way to get great works if the galleries doesn't know you. I've built amazing relationships over the years by meeting people in art fairs, and I was just thinking, let's see if I were to restart everything from zero today, to do everything online. I'm really not sure if I can do everything again the same. But having said that, I think this lockdown period and also online viewing rooms have also allowed me to break from my usual routine. I usually, when I go to fairs, I have the tendency to visit the same galleries first, and this gets repeated year after year, and usually by the third or fourth day, depending how tired you are, it's pretty difficult to actually discover new galleries and new artists. I think what's different with doing this online is that it gave me the opportunity to go through the fair at my own pace and without all the distractions of a physical art fair. I've managed to discover many artists I did not know before, and also engage with galleries I didn't come across before and didn't have the chance to meet previously. So I've been trying my best to make the most out of this period. Amazingly, I've actually managed to make many new relationships. I've done many Zoom calls with new galleries and learned about their programs. It got me very excited this past couple months. Really appreciate all the conversations I had recently, and I hope to meet everyone, all those guys soon. So I think in many ways, I think this has been surprisingly positive for me. I think it gave me an opportunity to do more research and to rethink about my collection, how I want to grow the collection and which artists I want to focus on. Yeah, in regards to, as you mentioned, in regards to buying art, I wish I could always have the opportunity to see an artwork before making a purchase. But for a collector who's living in Indonesia most of the time, it's really hard. I was looking at all the acquisitions I made since 2018. Actually, about 80% of the time, I don't get to see the artwork before making the decision. I think this is pretty normal these days with most collectors. A lot of everything is pretty much done by emails and PDFs. But I think the past 3 months, what is the main difference I'm noticing is that since galleries cannot have a physical show, the presentation online, the content, it just becomes so much more essential, and because that's the only means of presentation. I think art fairs, galleries, and artists has actually adopted really well and really quickly. So I think previously, it's either going to the show or receiving a PDF, but now I think the content is just so much richer. You have, as you mentioned, you have videos of artists, you have 360-degree virtual reality viewing rooms. So the way I think art is presented online has improved so much in a very short period of time. And I think ultimately that helps with my decision-making and purchasing art, because most of the time it's difficult for me to actually be there to see shows.
Great, good. Well, that's a very optimistic view on what's happened, which is fantastic. I mean, I think if this means that people are better able to connect with collectors all over the world in the future, afterwards, and then of course the collectors are able to meet them in person and see the artworks in person, that'll be a very positive development in a very negative time. Last but not least, Ashley Carr co-founded the New York-based advisory firm Modica Carr Art Advisory with her business partner Suzanne Modica. The main focus is on contemporary art, but you work with a very wide range of collectors. So I'd be curious to hear how you would generalize a little, or maybe how you would differentiate between how different collectors have tended to respond to this online only environment, and also how are they responding, but also what does it change for you in your advisory role?
Hi everyone. Hi Arif. Hi Kamel, Mark. Thanks for having me. I would say, first of all, Suzanne and I, to sort of echo Arif a little bit, we're so impressed at how quickly galleries created these new platforms. And I think, if I recollect correctly, Art Basel Hong Kong was sort of the beginning, and it happened very quickly. It was within a few weeks, you had launched this platform. And honestly, I think in New York, we were a bit blindsided because unfortunately it coincided directly with the lockdown here. It was the same exact week that it started. So little did we know that this was going to be what the future looked like for quite some time. And then within a couple of weeks, all of the galleries started launching these platforms. We were amazed at how efficient it was, how innovative it was, and also how much information we were receiving, which was a challenge, a welcome challenge at that time. And we still kind of refined it and distilled it in a similar way as we always would, but we were receiving a lot more information than normal. So that was a challenge for us. I would say in the beginning, we had a very sort of light touch with clients because we were in the thick of it here the first 3 weeks. So those last 2 weeks of March into early April, we were receiving so much information, but we weren't really sure if we should be sharing it quite yet because some of our clients were sick, some were dealing with their own businesses, family situations. So we sort of decided to wait until people start reaching out to us. And that happened a lot faster than we would have imagined. I think people in lockdown, they were so curious to know what we were seeing, what artists were working on, what was happening around the world. And little by little, people started coming, reaching out to us saying, what are you seeing? Can you send us this or that? So it was really amazing. And I think, as Arif said, it doesn't replace going to a gallery or a museum or a fair, but it was sort of a triage moment, in a traumatic moment. I think it was welcomed and really embraced by most of our clients. As far as sort of the individual nuances, it's interesting to think about because there is a certain consistency, I think, with how the client would approach a physical fair and a virtual fair. There's a lot of similarities. So for example, a client who really wants us to refine everything in advance and distill this information, go in with a bunch of research already, and maybe they want to see 10 works in person, and those are their first spots that they want to hit, and then make a decision. They act the same way in the virtual format too. They say, I'm not going to go in there and dig around on my own. Can you please go through this for me in advance and then tell me what I need to see? Whereas our clients who are more sort of like to go through the fair at their leisure and take a lot of time and go to every booth, to Arif's point, now you can actually do that. It's very hard to do at a real fair. Goodness knows Suzanne and I have tried, even a week in Basel. It's hard to see everything. But now with these platforms, especially since the fairs are, some of them are extended 2 weeks and beyond, you really have all the time in the world to go through. And so to your last question, Mark, I think that in an interesting way, our process hasn't changed that much, but it's almost sort of inverted. Whereas we would do the bulk of the research in advance and then enter the fair. Now we're still doing research in advance, but there's actually a lot more research happening afterwards as we are going into booths and being exposed to artists that we're not familiar with. And our clients are as well. So we have sort of running lists of artists that we've been doing research on that as soon as we can see art again, which I hope is very soon, we'd like to see in person. So that's sort of, the sort of two kind of character traits, I would say, of some of the collectors that we're working with right now.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's that's a perspective that gives hope in the sense that although most people would say that at the moment, personal relationships with the gallery, knowing the artist's work, having seen it is what's driving actual sales, it sounds like from what you're saying and what from Arif is saying, there's actually a potentially quite a large pipeline of people who want to discover new galleries in person, see new artworks and artists who are new to them in person. I'm going to start with a few questions to the panel. For the audience, you can start formulating your questions and we'll get to them in 10 or 15 minutes. So Kamel, I'll start with you. We've seen this amazing avalanche of new approaches. I'm curious, obviously, it's not like you weren't super busy before. You know, I've seen you in 3 different parts of the world within the same month, you know, and I'm sure you've been to twice as many. But once we start moving again, how do you see what you've developed in the last few months fitting into the broader enterprise of the gallery?
Funny thing, during the confinement, when I was in my apartment, some of the during all those days, I was watching my agenda, and I was saying that on March 25 I was in Tokyo, on 28 I was in New York, and blah blah blah. On May I was at whatever. So it was extremely strange, I would say, sad, to see that how the collapse was so sudden, and it was extremely strange. So I would say after weeks, I was thinking that getting to touch the time, to see that we could maybe say no to some things, and I was maybe like how do you say, a small mouse in a small cage, running in the wheel, you know, and getting with all the competitors from Hong Kong to New York to Sao Paulo to whatever, you know. It was a kind of a global race. And maybe now, during those 2 months, I was stopping writing, and I wrote so many, I was telling you, white pages to see what was my next challenges, what was the most important things I wanted to achieve and to reach. How could I bring the most energy and potentiality with the artists I'm working with, as I'm mainly and exclusively a primary market gallery. So it's very interesting to see that this time brought me a lot of response that I didn't have time to ask myself. You know, I'm now a mid-term gallery. I'm 20 years old, and I know now from those 2 months what are the most important things I want to bring, and what I want to do, and what I want to accelerate and to go very precisely. I was telling you about the idea of what was my expectation, but also I know more and more that I'm extremely happy to be based in Paris and to have all those 4 places in Paris. I'm really a Parisian gallery. I'm flying everywhere. I will keep on getting to all the fairs, you know, the Basel ones, of course, the FIAC, the Fries, Maastricht in New York, but I would be very focused now, extremely focused, to try to bring all the energy and all the inspiration for the artists I'm working with, and not getting to every part of the world. For some time I was asking myself why. I was waking up somewhere, and I was, before waking up, standing up, I didn't know where I was. I could be in Madrid, or I could be in London. Sometimes I was forgetting. You know, it's very strange, this situation in which you are really racing and racing. So maybe this quarantine brings me some response and give me more focus on some of the challenges I want to do for the next 10 years.
Do you think that what you've done in the past few months on the digital front will allow you to be in Paris more, to be more, not just of a Parisian gallery, but to be more of a Parisian?
I would say that I was a worldwide gallery. I was definitely, I was answering to Arif in Jakarta, or in Singapore, in Hong Kong, and I was with many of my friends, like Ashley in New York. I was with people, I was telling you, in Sao Paulo, everywhere, but I was in Paris every day. My first 2 months in my 20 years career life, I was every day with my wife. I could have do another baby with my wife, every day with my wife, my kids, and I was thinking and what to do and what not to do. So I would say it's very interesting to try to get the positive from the situation. To exactly appreciate what was for us all those extremely important, because physicality will never be a substitute to the digital. That's why I was telling you that for me, incarnation is very important. Starting from one point and bring to the audience all the possibility, the potentiality of digitals, but it needs to come from something, from a base. I'm very French. I'm the Eiffel Tower, and I bring it to the world.
Arif, obviously this has been a great period for you as a collector, as you were talking before about all these great developments. Do you expect that to continue? What's your gut feeling for how things will look, let's say, 6 months from now, if we're being optimistic about the evolution of this crisis?
I think that's a great question. I think that's probably the most important question. And I think nobody has a clear answer right now.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, what I'm curious to hear from you guys actually is, currently the situation is either we have a gallery show or it's an OVR, an online viewing room, or it's an art fair, or if the art fair doesn't happen, then you have an OVR, right? But, I was thinking, is there a possibility to do this simultaneously? So, I mean, to have a physical gallery show, but then also to do the online at the same time, to do an art fair and also to do an online version and, to do it simultaneously, because I've been actually wanting to go to Miami, Basel, for example, for the past 10 years. But in terms of timing, it just doesn't work for me. It's, beginning of December and it's always a difficult time. So I've missed it every single year.
Yeah.
Of course, I do get a lot of previews for the fair, but I'm sure there's like 100 or 200 galleries that I'm still missing. So I'm pretty much missing Art Miami, Basel every single year, So I was just wondering of course, if you want the full experience, you go to the actual fair, but is it possible to have an online version for the rest of the world who actually can't make it?
I mean, that remains to be seen. What's interesting is originally we had planned for Hong Kong that the online viewing rooms would be for works that weren't at the fair. It was a completely different concept, and then we pivoted away from it. I mean, what's interesting is what you're talking about, could you have the physical show and the online show is actually about to happen next week. There are, I think, 30 galleries in Berlin who've organized something called Basel by Berlin, where they're going to install next week the works that they're going to have on the Art Basel online viewing rooms within their gallery. But that's not the only version I've heard of this. I've heard, here and there. I mean, in Berlin, it seems it's very organized. But I know a lot of galleries are doing this and either making that clear or letting their collectors know that if they happen to be in that city, and if it's a city where you can go and visit galleries, that the works or some of the works will be there. I mean, it's actually something that I really encourage. I think it's a great sort of hybrid thing in this particular moment. Ashley, same question to you. What are you expecting is going to happen to all this great digital content once people start traveling again?
I think it will still be there. I think it will still be there for sure. I don't see any reason why they can't sort of coexist in a symbiotic relationship. And, in a way, it's a more interesting question maybe for a gallerist because we don't have an online platform. But my understanding too is that galleries and fairs are receiving a lot of data from these viewing rooms of who is looking, who's entering the rooms and what they're looking at. Mm-hmm. I've heard some galleries have doubled their mailing lists during the past 3 months. So in a way, I don't see why you would be keen to give that up. So I do see going forward that they will coexist. And I think the example of what's happening in Berlin is wonderful. I think that there's a few galleries in New York that might try to sneak in some viewings next week if we're lucky from their Basel booths. So I think that they will kind of live symbiotically into the future.
Yeah. I mean, it's this very weird moment where we're talking about the Basel booths, and I'm actually at Messeplatz for the first time in this whole Zoom series that we've done. And of course, the tragedy is that we won't all be here next week. And yet somehow these are still Basel works. One of the really interesting developments, and this is something that I think we helped to push forward, when we said that for the online viewing rooms, every piece would have to have either a price or a price range, is that there's a lot more prices out there now attached to artworks than there were in the past. I'll let Kamel go last on this. I'll start with Arif. Arif, how does this change things? Have you noticed this? What does it mean as a collector to have this kind of this transparency that a lot of collectors have wanted for a long time?
I think I think the art world is a very intimidating place for new collectors. And I remember the days when I first started, I was quite reluctant to ask for prices and sometimes even for artist names, and I knew lots of people who actually want to start, but I'm just so afraid to make the first step, as it's very intimidating and quite opaque. So I think this is a great thing for new collectors. I think the access to prices empowers collectors, as it gives them the opportunity to do more research and analysis. And I feel this also benefits the galleries in some ways too, because I can't imagine how many requests galleries get every single day just from people just asking for prices. And I think, I think the prices being open is sort of an automatic filtering process. So I think whoever is still inquiring after seeing the works and seeing the prices, to galleries, I think they are probably quite serious, So I also understand the art market will never be fully transparent. There'll be there's still waiting lists, there's still allocations, but I think that's perfectly fine. But I believe as the market becomes more transparent, it also has the potential to become much larger. Again,
a sign of hope. Ashley, how do your collectors feel about this?
They love it, as do I. I think it's great. I think that, Suzanne and I pride ourselves on complete transparency with our clients, and we like working with galleries who are transparent with us. And it's sort of that simple. I think we could all agree, I don't know, that the art world could definitely use more transparency. And I think, as Arif said, it's very intimidating for new collectors coming in. And I think it works well when all of the galleries have to do it. And that's what's so beautiful about, some of the platforms we've seen. There's no way out. They have to list the price. So for Suzanne and I personally, it's not a huge change in that if we're looking for a specific work, we already know how it's priced. But I do think what's happened is, even when we're going through the viewing rooms, there are some artists that maybe we wouldn't have considered before because for whatever reason we thought they were above this client's budget, or at a different price point, where suddenly we're seeing, oh, actually that could make sense. And so we're adding it to the list and doing research. And then in a more fundamental way, I think, the art world, everyone is doing market survey. Everyone is keeping track of primary and secondary market prices anyway. And this just makes it a little bit easier for everybody. So I think it's great. I mean, obviously I know there's some people that don't agree with that, but I think it's really wonderful.
I mean, I think one of the interesting aspects of this is that when we talk about people being artists being surprisingly inexpensive, it's not just younger artists. In fact, younger artists might comparatively seem overpriced when you look at how many great historical artists have work that's still comparatively really out of line with their achievements. And, that's especially true, of course, of artists, who are, women, people of color, from peripheral areas of the art world. Kamel, if there's one person on this panel who's going to speak against transparency, it might be you. Last but not least, what do you think about this? How do your artists feel about this? Because as a rule, we never talk about what happens in the selection committee rooms, but this is not about selections. When we talked to our committees about this, they said the only issue is that some of our artists might not be comfortable with prices being shared. And I actually had a request from a gallery today saying one of our artists doesn't like this. And I said, unfortunately, I hate to disappoint you, but that's the rule for this because we think it's important. Regardless, Kamel, tell me how you see this as a gallerist and as someone who works closely with artists.
Since we were always extremely transparent, because long-term behavior with your career brings you to the fact that you need to be extremely transparent. But that's true that some artists were expensive. They felt, first of all, it was their rules and we need to follow them. I am a primary market and I don't want to commit something wrong with what they think is good for them. But some of the artists were more expensive than the others, because we have a group of young artists who are very affordable. But some of the artists who are more expensive, I'm not giving prices, but you can imagine who are they in my group of artists. They would think that it would be better to write price on request. But most of the people who know the kind of prices of these artists, they know mostly. And also, I would say, when we started the online, we were like people who didn't eat for days. We wanted to have requests. We were so happy to answer to people and to say, oh, I'm here, I'm Kamel, I'm Marie-Sophie, I'm Luca, I'm Jesse. The price of this artist is blah, 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 because we wanted to get connected, It's very important, because in fairs, when you have a physical person in front of you, there's waves. When you are in Art Basel, waves of people, waves. And at one point, sometimes you don't have the time to eat your sandwich or your cookie. But when we were in the confinement, I was watching my email every minute to see how many emails I would receive. So when we were bringing the platform, we wanted to have some questions from all the collectors about prices, about museums, about localization. So it's very interesting to see that, of course, we need transparency, but we need also to follow the rules of the artists we are working with. We can't go against. When someone is saying, of course, I want this work to be presented in Art Basel, Miami, we are not going to bring another work. We are extremely respectful with what are the expectations of the artist. Don't forget that we are a primary market gallery. So we want to be extremely close to and to commit what the artists are interesting to be received by the audience.
So two questions, two follow-up questions, and I'll make them very, very simple. Yes or no? Do you think we will see more prices on the walls at art fairs and in galleries now? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. And maybe a more nuanced answer. Do you see the attitude of your artists towards having their prices be published change during this period? Or is it the artists who were okay with it before are okay with it now and the others are still not okay with it?
Is the question for me or for
the question is for you, because you represent artists.
I would say, also, for all those artists who are extremely high priced, it's very difficult to see their prices in the networks when you see all the protests and all those things. I would say it's a question of also being in a situation in which it's a confidential conversation with the collector.
Yeah.
It's maybe also our culture in France, which is judéo-chrétienne. There's a French proverb which says, vivons bien, vivons cachés, which means we can live okay if we are hidden. It's not
right.
To hide the price. It's also, you don't want to show that you are very healthy when you have all those guys protesting, that I totally understand, I'm with for. So it's also, art is also intimate. It's a conversation between an artwork, a gallerist, and a collector.
Good. Since we're on the topic of power, some people have felt that this period actually accelerates the gaps in power between various galleries, because some galleries, of course, have been able to invest for a long time in this and certainly can invest more time and energy than others. And yet what I'm hearing from Arif and from Ashley especially is that this is a time when collectors are discovering galleries and artists who they hadn't before because they were kind of driven to the usual suspects. So Ashley, I'm curious because I think you have a very broad take on this, or at least very many perspectives. Do you see this as a moment where, in a sense, the rich get richer or the powerful become more powerful and the market consolidates more? Or do you see this as a moment where the market fractures in a healthy way?
I think I cannot predict that. I wish I could.
Yeah.
But I think that I think there's a potential to level the playing field.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we've seen that yet. One of the complications is that I do think, with the exception of people who are really digging, maybe like Arif and some of our clients, these platforms do tend to favor more established artists and more established galleries. I think it's a lot more difficult when you're a small gallery with emerging artists that you want to introduce virtually. It's difficult. It takes some, a collector that's really adventurous to acquire something that they've never seen in person before. They've never seen an example by that artist before. So in that way, I do think it's a bit tricky. I know that the larger galleries obviously have opened up platforms, have opened up their platforms to some smaller galleries, which is an innovative idea. It's an interesting initiative. I don't know if that's translating to dollars and cents for those smaller galleries. I don't know if it's building out their client base. I don't know. Potentially it is. But I think if we're talking about power gaps, it's a tricky one too, because in moments where the economy is in such turmoil, and here in the US in particular, we're going through several pandemics of different, varieties that are all quite traumatic and quite intense. And usually you see that, places that have consolidated their positions already, so maybe potentially some of the larger galleries, could use that as an opportunity to consolidate even further. And that is a point of great concern for us, I would say, and a sort of reminder that, these smaller and mid-sized galleries, they've already been struggling for quite some time. And this is going to be a rocky road ahead for the next 6 to 12 months. And, I'd like to encourage all of us to support our small and mid-sized local galleries, whether it's in Paris or Jakarta or Singapore or New York, because I think they're really going to need our support right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great note to wrap up the conversation among ourselves, and I think to go to questions from the audience. I have a question. Maybe I'll shoot it to Arif. Do you think virtual reality is an important part of the process now? Do you see that as being a big thing in terms, as a collector, that you're going to spend a lot of time with?
I mean, we've seen some amazing platforms. I think it was Votic Collect. They're supported by Zwerner, Miro, I think Pilar Correas. I do believe it actually helps a lot for people who can't be there to see the show. You actually, using platforms like this, you actually can feel like you're almost there. So I think it's a great thing. Yeah.
Kamel, have you experimented with VR?
Yes, of course. We started 7-8 years before, when we had this incredible show.
Of course, yeah.
At Grand Palais with rest in peace Wan Yongping, and it was this big snakes which was navigating in the nave of the Grand Palais, and we produced a beautiful movie which could bring to the audience, because it was a work in the spatiality. It was so beautiful, and so we could brought this, not the work because it was 200 meters, but we sold to the M Plus in Hong Kong the sketch and the movie of the work, which could make understand the people what could have been this experience with the artwork, which was 40 meters high and more than 200 meters. So VR for that can explain and give the experience of the utopia.
Good. Ashley, is VR a big thing for your collectors? Are people buying Oculus goggles and going through?
Not quite yet, but I wouldn't be surprised with how quickly things are moving if it happens sometime soon, but not yet, no.
Yeah. I mean, I would even say, you know, one step back, what we're seeing with the online viewing room that's coming up next week is because we have the capacity for galleries now to upload videos, a lot of galleries are doing it, are taking videos, you know, panning around a sculpture, but also panning across the surface of a painting or of a drawing, you know, that it's really, people are trying to give a better sense of the physicality of the show. A question from Asia for Arif. It's popular for luxury retailers and even museums to do live streaming on various social platforms. If art exhibitions go live in this way, will you be more tempted to participate or buy from live streaming sessions? Because you talked before about going through it at your own pace, but do you see this? I mean, obviously in luxury retail, and especially in Asia, this is a much more common thing that people live stream from a store and you buy from the live stream. Is that a future step of development, do you think?
Or is it for art or?
For art. For luxury, it obviously works.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's just so much content out there right now. You know, I mean, recently since I've been stuck at home, you know, for the past couple of months, I've been very active looking around on Instagram. I mean, I've been following amazing live streams, for example, by Johan Koenig, Anita Zabludowicz. I mean, they're doing amazing stuff. You know, you can, I think there were some collectors' homes visits. You know, I mean, people I don't know, so I wouldn't have the chance normally to actually to see their homes and see their artworks. But you know, through Instagram live stream, it's, you know, I think some of the collectors, for example, the Horts. There was, I think, Carol Server from New York, Alberto Chehebar from LA, and you actually can, you know, see their homes and see what they're collecting, what the strategies are. There's just so much stuff on content online right now. They're amazing, for example, podcasts. I've been following, I'm a huge fan of Top Art with Russell Tovey and Robert Diamond. Also, Great Women Artists with Katie Hessel. I mean, there's just lots and lots of content. And I think it's actually helped me with my decision making with buying art, you know, listening and looking at all this content around. So it's been really helpful.
Yeah. I'm curious, you know, one of the things, of course, about buying work that you haven't seen is that there's always the risk that you don't like it or that kind of thing. I mean, Ashley, to the extent that you've worked with collectors who bought work that they haven't seen, is it an issue that people, when they finally get it, they say, oh, I didn't realize it was so big or so small or so pink or so dark? Or, I mean, how much of an issue is that when you haven't seen a work in person?
Well, I think that's what Suzanne and I are here for, is to minimize risk. So if it's absolutely necessary that a client buys something without seeing it, which we really, we don't encourage, but of course it happens, and it has happened a few times in the past few months. We do try to minimize risk through some of the tools that you're talking about. I mean, video is a great tool, you know, having an auction house just video every single surface of the work, walk around it, you know, condition reports, things like this. Obviously dimensions and all of that, that's all under control in advance. We know what can get in and out and where things are going to go. So our job is to really minimize that from happening. So we haven't had very many experiences like that. And in the case where we do have, for example, we have a new client who bought something sight unseen in one of the online fairs recently, which astonished me. You know, he's very young though, so I think it also speaks to a sort of different comfort level with the digital world. But it was an artist we knew very well, that Suzanne and I knew very well for years. And so we could describe it so precisely, what the surface was like, what, you know, the wall power that it had. And so it gave that person confidence to move forward. But for us, it's quite rare that we would encourage someone to buy something without seeing it.
Kamel, something Ashley just said led me to another question that I'd seen floating around. Do you see a difference in who's buying online versus who's buying normally? Is there a different type of collector? Are you meeting new collectors, a different group of collectors, or different individual collectors? Who's buying now compared to who's buying normally, so to speak?
It's a question for me, no?
For you, yeah.
Thank you. First of all, we were extremely surprised to see people so well informed with the artists we are working with, and asking and requesting questions and different agendas of the next museum shows and whatever. So of course we sold works to some of the collectors we are working with since a long time, that we were meeting in fairs and the gallery, but also to some of the new prospects that we had during those fairs, and we had the data. And it's very interesting to see that Arif was saying that when he started, he was a little bit worried how to ask, how to even the name of the artist, that I totally understand that. But with the digital situation, everyone can request whatever, and he can ask to even the mega galleries if this work of this artist is available or not. So in this very strange situation, we are all in the same line. Before, when there was this density of fairs, of acceleration, and people who were all with the same artists, now it's very interesting to see that the market would be much more comfortable for collectors, affordable for requests. So I would say it's a very good time, even it's a difficult time. It's a good time because it's a redistribution of cards. And people like Arif in Jakarta or Ashley in New York with Suzanne, they can even change and ask again to other artists that they didn't have time to sync, because they were all focused on the same artist. I know that most of the collectors or art advisors are getting to the same galleries. They are all coming to me, or to this one, or to this one. With this situation, we have plenty of time, and we can check and inform ourselves to the program of this art, this gallery from Berlin, this gallery from Berlin, this gallery from Glasgow, from New York, whatever, So I'm maybe from those people who are watching mostly the half of the full glass, not the small glass. I'm trying to be extremely positive and to see what the different options which are now offered to us and the audience of collectors.
I mean, I would say what's interesting at the broadest level is that we're in this moment where a lot of the kind of velvet ropes that were in front of the gallery, the hoops that people had to jump through, are falling. And I've always held, as long as I've been at Art Basel, that this kind of thing of making collectors feel insecure, or making people, making people afraid to ask, or even intimidating collectors more than they realized, was completely counterproductive, especially at a time when, if you saw the next great Silicon Valley collector walking around at a fair, you would have no idea who they are, because they're not wearing a fat watch, and they're not wearing the great shoes, and they're not wearing the Savile Row suit, And in a sense, I think that's fantastic. And also, I mean, the fact is that nowadays, anybody in the world can send me a direct message on Instagram, or you, or any of you, in a sense, the lines are much shorter, and of course there's more triage to do. But you made a point, Kamel, about more being offered now. I mean, Ashley, do you see that your collectors are getting access to work now that they weren't before? And then Arif, I'm going to ask you the question next, but I'll start with you, Ashley, because I think you have the broader perspective. Do you see more work available on the market, or better work available for your collectors more easily now?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. which is, you know, it's sort of unfortunate because I think sometimes it takes a moment like this for those sorts of works to come out of the woodwork, so to speak. But I have to say that that's sort of been our main focus over the past few months, is we did have works that clients had been looking for quite some time, that were very hard to get, that started appearing. So, I mean, when that started happening, it was very fast. It was like, you know, done deal, because you have to take advantage of the moment. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think also the gallerists were very generous about that, because, you know, people were nervous about what was going to happen going forward, and with so much uncertainty in the world. So they started releasing works that are maybe a little bit harder to find, that take a little bit longer to work on. And I guess that's sort of one of the silver linings of this moment for some of our collectors, for sure.
Arif, question to you. Are you being offered works now that you weren't before?
I wish it was the case. But unfortunately, I still feel that, you know, quality is always in demand, even in such markets, in, you know, such strange times. I think great artists, popular artists, I think there's still waiting lists, and I don't feel that there's you know, all of a sudden there's a drop off in demand or something. I don't sense that.
I mean, there was an interesting remark. I think it was on the Art Basel and UBS Art Market Report panel that my colleague Noah Horowitz hosted a couple weeks ago. But somebody remarked that you know, if collectors have this idea that they're going to be able to get everything really cheaply, they have to remember that a gallerist who's under financial pressure is not going to sell from the top of the pyramid. They're going to sell from the bottom of the pyramid. So yes, you might get great works, but they won't be, yes, you might get great prices, but they won't be on the great works that you were hoping to get. Another question from the audience, and I'll start with Kamel on this one. Do you think this in any way tips the balance in this endless range war between galleries and auction houses? Who do you think this moment benefits?
It's very interesting to see this moment in which you see some new possibility, potentiality. I had some conversation with Sotheby's and Christie's, trying to bring some connection with primary market, because everything would be disturbed now. Everything would be changed, all the sales and everything. So, you know, it's so strange moment in which you need to be extremely flexible, extremely not worried, but trying to see what could be the next moment. Very strange time. I mean, you know, there's this kind of porosity between fairs, biennale, galleries, auction houses. We don't know exactly, but we see that all frontiers, which were extremely like walls, you know, there's a porosity. So we need to be very aware to respect the DNA of what we are doing with legitimacy, but to be extremely aware what would be the next future.
Arif, as a collector, how would you compare what the auction houses have done versus what the galleries have done?
I think it's a great question. I think, I mean, I know some collectors personally who exclusively buy only an auction, and they never buy from the galleries, the primary market. And the reason is actually because of transparency. So you know, everything, you know, yeah, I guess everything is more transparent. You can see prices, you know, it's clearer, I guess. So I feel this is an opportunity for galleries, you know, to become more transparent and to be, I guess, more inviting, I guess, you know, more friendly and inviting for new collectors, especially, I think. Yeah, so it's a great opportunity for the primary market, I feel.
Ashley, same question to you. How do you see shifts in what's going on, and might they have longer term impacts in terms of how collectors view and work with auction houses and galleries?
You know, I think to Kamel's point, we'll see. I definitely, you know, heard of certain initiatives for collaboration. with galleries and auction houses. I find it complicated for many reasons. But I think what we're going to see going forward is a lot of experimentation and collaboration as people try to figure out what exactly works in this new world. I mean, the world is completely different, and it's not going to go back to the way it was, in my opinion. So I think we're going to see a lot of innovation, a lot of experimentation with galleries, with auction houses, with, bigger galleries helping smaller galleries, auction houses wanting to do projects with primary market works. I mean, I think we're going to see everything over the next few months.
Yeah, great. We've actually run out of time, and although we haven't run out of questions, so I'm going to start by apologizing to everybody whose question we didn't get to. It's a little bit hectic trying to get through them all. So even if they were great questions, we might not even have seen them. I really want to thank our panelists. You guys were wonderful. It was great to see three different perspectives from three different parts of the market, from three different parts of the world. For those of you or your friends who want to watch this or watch this again, this talk will be archived on YouTube. As I've mentioned several times, next week we're launching the second version of the online viewing rooms for Art Basel. I can say, having snuck in through the back door, as I like to do at our own fairs as well, there's amazing work there. So it's worth the time to go through. And as Arif pointed out, you have time to go through it. You don't have to rush through. We're also going to we won't have a conversation like this one next week. We're going to have a faster paced set of Zoom conversations, panels, and we'll be announcing all the details soon. Again, to my panelists, thanks for taking the time. To the audience, thanks for visiting. And we'll see you next week. Goodbye from Basel.
Thank you.